I'm Sophia, and I'm 17 years old. My life looks perfect from the outside. My family is rich. We live in a big, luxurious house with tall, white pillars and golden chandeliers in every room. My father, Mr. Adrian Collins, is a successful businessman, and my mother, Mrs. Isabella Collins, spends her days organizing parties and shopping for the finest clothes. I have an older sister, Lila, who is 21. Everyone says Lila is beautiful. She has long, straight black hair like my mother, and she's always dressed in elegant, expensive clothes. Growing up, everyone admired my family. We were the perfect image of wealth and happiness. But inside, I always felt different. My parents adored Lila. They gave her the best of everything: attention, love, gifts. And me? I was always the quiet one, sitting in the corner, watching them laugh together. I never understood why I felt left out. I was 14 when I first heard the cruel words that changed everything. It was during recess at school, on a sunny day when my friends and I were playing near the big oak tree. One boy, Robert, who was always loud and mean, walked up to me with a smirk on his face. "You know, Sophia," he said, "I heard you're not even your father's real daughter." His words hit me like a punch to the stomach. "What are you talking about?" I asked, my voice trembling. "I overheard my parents talking," he continued. "They said your dad isn't really your dad. You're adopted or something." I stood there, frozen. Was it true? Could my whole life be a lie? I ran home that day, my mind spinning, but I didn't dare ask my parents. I was too scared to hear the answer, as if things couldn't get worse. When I turned 15, my mother dropped a bombshell. One afternoon, I was sitting in the drawing room, reading a book, when she entered, her face serious. "Sophia," she said, "it's time for you to start thinking about marriage. You need to find a husband soon." I stared at her in disbelief. "But Mom, what about Lila? She's older. Shouldn't she get married first?" My mother's face darkened. "Don't question me," she snapped. "You're the one who needs to marry now. We've had enough of waiting." I was too shocked to respond. Why was she pushing me to get married so young? I was only 15, and I didn't understand why she seemed so desperate. But when my father agreed with her, I knew I didn't have a choice. Soon, men began visiting our house. I hated every moment of it. They were all rich, well-dressed, and much older than me. Each time a man came to our home, my parents would dress me up in fancy clothes, like I was some kind of doll to be displayed. One by one, they came to inspect me. I didn't say much. I didn't want to. I couldn't imagine spending my life with any of these men. They were all wrong for me. Some were in their 30s, others even older, but none of them cared about who I was as a person. They only cared about my family's wealth. I felt trapped. My parents kept reminding me that this was my duty, that it was time for me to take responsibility. But I wasn't ready. I still felt like a child, and my dreams of living a free, happy life seemed to slip away with each passing day. One evening, as the sun began to set, a new man came to visit our home. His name was Mr. George Atwood. He was 40 years old, tall, and very rich. His presence made me uneasy. There was something about the way he looked at me that made my skin crawl, like he wasn't interested in me as a person, only as something to own. "I want to marry your daughter," Mr. Atwood said boldly to my father as we sat in the grand dining room. The air felt heavy, and my heart started pounding. I could see the look of approval in my father's eyes. This man was exactly the kind of wealthy, influential husband they wanted for me. "But I'm only 15, I whispered, my voice barely audible. My mother glared at me. "You will marry him," she said firmly. "He can provide for you. This is what's best for you." I felt like I couldn't breathe. I wanted to scream, to run away, but I knew I had no choice. My family was forcing me into a life I didn't want, but I was too scared to fight back. For days, I tried to come to terms with my fate. The preparations for the wedding began almost immediately. My mother was thrilled, and even my father seemed satisfied. But I felt like my life was being taken away from me, piece by piece. Then, something happened that no one expected. One night, just a week before the wedding, Mr. Atwood suddenly called off the engagement. He sent a letter saying he had changed his mind. My parents were furious, but deep inside, I felt a strange sense of relief. I didn't know why he had backed out, and I didn't care. All I knew was that I had been given a second chance. But this wasn't the end. My parents were determined to marry me off, and I knew the pressure would return soon enough. As I sat alone in my room, thinking about my future, the words that Robert had said to me years ago echoed in my mind. "You're not your father's real daughter." Could it be true? I decided I couldn't live with the uncertainty any longer. I needed to know the truth. One night, while my parents were out, I searched through the old family documents in the library, and that's when I found it. A birth certificate. But it wasn't mine. It was for a baby girl named Evelyn. The name was unfamiliar, but the date of birth matched mine. I stared at the document, my hands shaking. Was I really adopted? I needed answers, but I didn't know where to start. All I knew was that my life was built on secrets, and I was determined to uncover every single one of them. After the first engagement was called off, I thought I had escaped. But my parents didn't waste any time. They found another man, this time a younger one. His name was Victor Blackwood. He was 35, much older than me, but younger than Mr. Atwood. He came from an incredibly wealthy family, and that seemed to be all my parents cared about. When Victor first came to our house, I could see the excitement in my parents' eyes. He was handsome, with dark hair and green eyes that sparkled when he spoke. His smile seemed charming, but there was something about him that made me feel uneasy. He was quiet, his eyes cold, and he barely looked at me the entire time he spoke with my father. Still, my parents were thrilled. "He's perfect for you, Sophia," my mother said after he left. "He's rich, handsome, and from a good family. You'll have everything you want." Everything I want, I thought to myself. But what I wanted didn't matter. My parents had already made up their minds. The wedding was arranged quickly, and once again, I found myself trapped. The day of the wedding arrived, and as I stood in front of the mirror in my beautiful white dress, I felt like I was floating in a nightmare. My hair was styled perfectly, and the diamond necklace my mother had given me sparkled against my skin. Everyone said I looked beautiful, but I couldn't even recognize myself. As I walked down the aisle, I looked over at my parents. They smiled, but there were no tears in their eyes. Not like in those happy weddings I had always imagined, where parents cried because they were so proud of their daughters. My parents were happy, but it felt like they were happy to get rid of me. When the ceremony ended, and I was officially Mrs. Blackwood, I turned to my family to say goodbye. My mother gave me a quick hug. My father shook my hand, and Lila barely even looked at me. No one cried. No one seemed sad to see me go, but I was. I held back my tears as I climbed into the car with Victor. As the car drove away, I glanced back at the house, my childhood home, the place where I had spent so many years feeling alone. And now, I was leaving it behind for good. Victor's house, or rather, his mansion, was enormous. As we pulled up to the gates, my eyes widened in awe. Tall iron gates surrounded the property, and beyond them was a beautiful garden with fountains, tall trees, and perfectly manicured lawns. The mansion itself was like something out of a fairy tale, with its grand architecture and stone walls covered in ivy. The windows were tall and elegant, and the front doors were made of heavy oak. "Wow," I whispered under my breath as we stepped out of the car. "You'll get used to it," Victor said flatly, not even looking at me. Inside, the house was just as stunning. The floors were made of marble, and there were chandeliers hanging from the ceiling in every room. The furniture was luxurious: leather couches, polished wooden tables, and beautiful paintings on the walls. It felt like I had walked into a palace. At first, I felt a strange sense of happiness. Maybe things would be okay. Maybe I could make a life here. The mansion was beautiful, and I had everything I could ever want. But something felt off. Victor wasn't acting like a new husband. He was distant, cold. He didn't even smile at me as we toured the house. That first night, I expected we would share a room like most married couples. But after dinner, Victor told me, "You'll be sleeping in the room down the hall. I'll be in my own room." "Why?" I asked, confused. "Aren't we married? Shouldn't we?" He cut me off sharply. "I'm tired, Sophia. We'll talk later." And that was the end of it. He walked away, leaving me standing there, confused and hurt. For the next few days, things didn't improve. Victor spent most of his time away from the house, attending meetings or traveling for business. When he was home, he was quiet, often locking himself in his study or disappearing into his room at night. I tried to talk to him, to get to know him, but he always pushed me away. "I'm busy," he would say, "later." But later never came. One night, as I lay in bed, I couldn't sleep. Something wasn't right. I had been in the house for almost 2 weeks, and Victor hadn't shown any interest in me. We barely spoke, and he never touched me. It felt like I was a guest in his home, not his wife. Curiosity got the best of me. I needed answers. Why was he avoiding me? Why was he acting so distant? That night, as the clock struck midnight, I made a decision. I got out of bed and quietly made my way down the hall to Victor's room. The door was slightly ajar, and a dim light spilled out into the hallway. My heart pounded in my chest as I approached the door. What was I expecting to find? Maybe he was working late, or maybe he was just reading. But as I got closer, I heard something that made my blood run cold. A soft, feminine laugh. My hand shook as I pushed the door open just a little more. And that's when I saw it. There, in the bed, was Victor. But he wasn't alone. Lying beside him, under the covers, was a woman. She had long, dark hair, and she was sleeping soundly, her arm draped over his chest. I felt like the floor had dropped out from under me. My legs felt weak, and I had to lean against the wall to keep from falling. How could this be happening? I was his wife, and yet here he was, in bed with another woman. I wanted to scream, to storm into the room and demand an explanation. But I couldn't move. I couldn't even breathe. I backed away slowly, my mind racing with a million thoughts. Who was she? How long had this been going on? Did my parents know? I stumbled back to my room, my heart shattered. I felt betrayed, humiliated, and more alone than ever. The next morning I sat at the breakfast table, my hands trembling as I sipped my tea. Victor walked in as if nothing had happened. He didn't even look at me. "Good morning," he said casually, picking up the newspaper and sitting down across from me. I wanted to confront him, to scream at him, but I couldn't find the words. I just stared at him, my mind replaying the image of him with that woman over and over again. "Is something wrong?" he asked, finally looking up at me. I opened my mouth to speak, but no words came out. How could he act so normal after what I had seen? How could he pretend like everything was fine? I knew then that my life had become a nightmare. I was trapped in this house, in this marriage with a man who didn't love me and who was hiding dark secrets. The tension hung thick in the air as I tried to focus on my breakfast. I could hear the clinking of cutlery against plates and the sound of Victor flipping through the newspaper. But all I could think about was the woman in his bed. I felt a wave of nausea wash over me, threatening to spill out my anger and betrayal. "Did you sleep well?" Victor asked, his eyes still glued to the pages of the newspaper. "Not really," I replied, forcing my voice to remain steady. "I had a lot on my mind." He looked up, his brows slightly furrowed, but he didn't press further. Instead, he returned to reading, and I felt like a ghost sitting at the table. After breakfast, I retreated to the garden, needing fresh air and space to think. The garden was as beautiful as I had imagined. Colorful flowers bloomed everywhere, and the air was fragrant with the scent of jasmine. I wandered through the pathways, but my heart was heavy. As I walked, I couldn't help but overhear the house staff gossiping in hushed voices. They spoke about Victor, mentioning a woman named Isabella, the same woman I had seen in bed with him. My heart raced as I leaned closer, pretending to admire the roses. "She's a socialite," one of the maids whispered. "She's been in his life for years. Everyone thought they were just friends, but it seems there's more to it." "What about Sophia?" another maid asked. "Poor girl, she doesn't even know." A chill ran down my spine. They thought I was oblivious, but I was not. I felt anger bubbling inside me, mixing with the despair that had already settled in my heart. Days passed, and the feeling of betrayal lingered like a shadow in our house. Victor continued to come and go, as if everything was normal. I was determined to confront him, but every time I tried to bring it up, he would change the subject or dismiss me with a wave of his hand. Then, one afternoon, just as I was beginning to feel a little more settled, there was a knock on the door. I opened it to find a tall woman standing there. She was striking, with long black hair and piercing blue eyes that seemed to look right through me. "Is Victor home?" she asked, her voice smooth and confident. I blinked in surprise. He's in his study. Can I help you?" "I'm Isabella," she said, brushing past me as if she owned the place. "We need to talk." My heart sank as she walked toward the study, and I hesitated before following her. What did she want? Victor looked surprised when he saw her. "Isabella, what are you doing here?" "I came to discuss a few things," she said, her tone casual, as if she were visiting a friend. I stood awkwardly by the door, my heart racing as they exchanged a look that sent chills down my spine. It was intimate, familiar. I felt like I was intruding on a private moment. "Can we talk alone?" Isabella said, her eyes flicking to me with a hint of disdain. "No, I'd like to stay," I said, surprising myself with my boldness. I needed to know what was happening. Victor opened his mouth to protest, but I stood my ground. I had endured enough silence. "I deserve to know what's going on," I declared, my voice firm. He sighed, running a hand through his hair, looking torn. "Fine, but I don't think this is a good idea." Isabella smiled slyly, as if enjoying the drama unfolding. "Oh, I think it's a great idea, Victor. The more the merrier." Victor led us to the sitting room, and I took a seat on the plush sofa, my heart pounding in anticipation. I felt like I was sitting on the edge of a cliff, about to plunge into the unknown. Isabella and I have a complicated history, Victor began, his voice low. We were together before I married you. The words hit me like a slap. Together? I echoed, my voice barely above a whisper. Romantically involved, he clarified, his gaze avoiding mine. But I thought it was over. And now? I pressed, feeling my heart race. Isabella stepped in, her expression smug. Victor and I have a bond that you can't break. You may have the ring, but I know him in ways you never will. A surge of anger flooded through me. What does that mean? You're still in love with him? She laughed lightly, tilting her head. Love? It's more than that. We have a connection. We're business partners too. Our families are intertwined. Business partners? I asked, confusion flooding my mind. You mean you have business meetings at night, in bed? Isabella raised an eyebrow, unfazed. You're quick. I admire that. But that's not the point. Victor's face was flushed, and he finally met my gaze. Sophia, it's complicated. Isabella is a part of my life. I didn't expect to marry you, but it was my parents' decision. I thought you could handle it. Handle what? I shouted, my voice echoing off the walls. Being married to a man who has an affair with another woman? You think I can just sit here and pretend everything is fine? Victor stood up, his face tense. I never wanted this. I never wanted you to find out like this. The conversation spiraled into a heated argument. I felt my heart shatter as they both revealed their secrets, their history. Victor tried to defend himself, but all I could hear was his betrayal ringing in my ears. I thought you were different, I cried. I thought I could trust you. Isabella leaned forward, her expression turning serious. Sophia, you need to understand something. You're not just in a marriage, you're in a game. You think love conquers all, but in our world it's about power, influence, and money. You're just a pawn in Victor's game. What do you mean? I asked, feeling lost. The Blackwoods and the Eastons have been rivals for generations, she explained. Your marriage was a business deal, a way to unite our families. Victor might pretend he cares about you, but this is about survival, control. Victor's silence spoke volumes. My heart sank further. I was just a tool to help him climb higher. Get out, I demanded, my voice trembling with rage and hurt. Both of you. Victor opened his mouth to protest, but I held my hand up. Just leave. I don't want to see either of you again. After they left, I felt a mixture of relief and devastation. I was alone, but at least I had taken a stand. I was done being a pawn. I needed to reclaim my life. Days turned into weeks. I stopped trying to connect with Victor. Instead, I focused on myself. I spent time in the garden, reading books and exploring my new surroundings. I was determined to find my own identity outside of this marriage. One evening, while I was taking a walk, I noticed a small cafe down the street from our mansion. It was quaint, with colorful flowers and cozy seating outside. I felt drawn to it. As I entered the cafe, the smell of fresh coffee and baked goods filled the air. I found a table in the corner and ordered a latte. While I waited, I looked around and noticed a young man sitting alone at the next table. He was sketching something in a notebook. He caught my eye and I smiled shyly. He returned the smile, and something about his warm gaze made me feel at ease. Are you an artist? I asked, leaning closer to see his sketch. He looked up, surprised. Oh no, just a hobby. I'm actually a writer. I come here for inspiration. A writer? I asked, intrigued. What do you write about? Life, love, and everything in between, he replied, his eyes sparkling with enthusiasm. I'm actually working on a novel. As we talked, I felt a connection forming between us. His name was Daniel, and he had a gentle spirit that made me feel understood. Over the next few weeks, I found myself returning to the cafe more often, always looking forward to my conversations with Daniel. He encouraged me to express my feelings and to write about my experiences, something I had never considered before. You should write your own story, Sophia, he said one day, his eyes shining with excitement. You have so much to say. His encouragement ignited something within me. I started to keep a journal, pouring out my thoughts and emotions onto the pages. It became my safe haven, a way to process my feelings and find clarity amidst the chaos of my life. As my friendship with Daniel deepened, I found solace in his company. He was kind, patient, and genuinely interested in me. With him, I could laugh and forget my troubles, even if just for a moment. But deep down, I felt guilty. Was it wrong to find comfort in someone else when my marriage was still in limbo? I knew Victor was still out there, and Isabella's presence lingered. One evening, after weeks of silence between Victor and me, I finally decided to confront him. I could no longer live in this limbo, feeling like a stranger in my own home. After spending the day with Daniel, I returned feeling stronger, ready to face whatever lay ahead. Victor, I called out, my voice echoing in the vastness of our mansion. He appeared in the living room, surprised to see me standing there with my arms crossed. What do you want, Sophia? His tone was flat, but I noticed a flicker of curiosity in his eyes. I want to talk about our marriage, I said firmly. I want to understand why you married me if you're still involved with Isabella. Victor sighed, running a hand through his hair as he sank into a nearby armchair. It's complicated, Sophia. You need to know that my marriage to you was not just a personal choice. It was a decision made by our families. Then why didn't you say anything? I demanded, feeling the heat rise in my cheeks. You let me walk into this marriage blind. Because I thought I could make it work, he replied, his voice low. I thought I could separate my feelings for Isabella from my duties as your husband. Duties? I scoffed. Is that all I am to you? A duty? Victor looked pained. No, it's not like that. You were supposed to bring peace between our families. The Blackwoods and the Eastons have been rivals for decades. Marrying you was meant to unite our families and secure our legacies. My heart raced as I processed his words. So, I'm just a pawn in this family game? What about love? What about my happiness? Life isn't a fairy tale, Sophia, he said, his eyes hardening. Isabella and I have history. She knows me in ways you don't. We have plans, business ventures that require us to stay connected. You were a way to protect my family, to keep our rivals at bay. So, you're saying that you never really wanted me? My voice trembled with hurt. Victor paused, his expression softening. I didn't expect to fall for you. When we met, I thought I could push aside my feelings for Isabella. But it's not easy. She has been a constant in my life. I've known her since childhood, and there's a depth of connection that I cannot ignore. My heart sank. I felt like I was suffocating, trapped in a marriage built on power rather than love. What do you want from me, Victor? Do you expect me to sit here and pretend everything is fine? I want you to understand, he said, leaning forward. You are my wife. I didn't plan for things to turn out this way, but I need you to trust me. I will protect you. Just stay with me a little longer. But at what cost? I whispered, feeling a tear slip down my cheek. The tension between us was palpable, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was losing myself. That night, I decided to go to the cafe, desperate to find some comfort. Daniel was waiting for me, and when he saw my red eyes, his expression turned serious. What happened? He asked gently, concern etched on his face. Victor, I started, unsure how to articulate the chaos in my heart. He said he married me to unite our families, to secure a legacy. Daniel's jaw tightened. That sounds like a lot of pressure. You deserve to be loved, Sophia. I sighed, my heart heavy. But I don't know if I can walk away from this marriage. What if I lose everything? My family, my home, everything. You have to choose yourself, Sophia, he urged. You can't live for someone else's expectations. You deserve to fight for your own happiness. As I spoke with Daniel, I felt the chains of my marriage slowly starting to loosen. I could no longer ignore the truth about Victor and Isabella. I needed to understand their connection more deeply. That night, I resolved to uncover the truth. Over the next few days, I observed Victor more closely. I noticed the way he would receive phone calls, often speaking in hushed tones and casting worried glances in my direction. It was clear that he was hiding something. And Isabella was still a looming presence in our lives, attending charity events and gatherings, always with Victor at her side. One afternoon, while Victor was out, I took a chance. I found his phone lying on the kitchen counter, the screen lit up with a message from Isabella. My heart raced. I knew I shouldn't, but I couldn't resist. I picked it up and opened the message. "Are you coming tonight? We can't keep hiding this," it read. Panic surged through me. What did this mean? My hands shook as I tried to calm my racing heart. I knew I had to confront Victor again. I needed answers. That night, when Victor came home, I was ready. "We need to talk," I said, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside me. "What now?" he asked, looking weary. "I found a message from Isabella," I replied, watching his expression change from tired to alarmed. "What are you talking about?" I held up his phone. "Don't lie to me, Victor. What are you hiding?" He took a deep breath, and for a moment, I thought he might come clean. "It's not what you think, Sophia." "Then tell me what it is," I demanded, my patience wearing thin. "We're business partners," he said finally, frustration lacing his words. "Our families have interests that are intertwined. It's not just about us. I thought I could handle this." "And how long do you plan to keep lying?" I pressed. "You can't keep living like this." His silence spoke volumes, and I felt my heart shatter again. "You're choosing her over me," I whispered, my voice cracking. "I never chose anyone," he shouted, running a hand through his hair. "I'm trying to balance everything. You have to understand that." I stepped back, the reality crashing down around me. I can't be part of this anymore. I deserve to know the truth, to be treated with respect, and to choose my own path. The following weeks were filled with tension. I focused on my writing, pouring all my emotions into my journal. Each word was a release, a cathartic experience that slowly rebuilt my confidence. But one evening, everything changed. I was at the cafe with Daniel, discussing my latest entries, when my phone buzzed. It was a message from Victor. "We need to talk. It's urgent." My heart raced as I responded, agreeing to meet at home. When I arrived, I found Victor waiting, his face grave. "What's going on?" I asked, anxiety coursing through me. "I received some troubling news," he began, his voice low. "Isabella is threatening to expose our family's secrets unless I end our marriage." My stomach twisted. "What does that mean?" "It means she's trying to manipulate me, to gain power over me. I thought I could keep her in check, but she's becoming more dangerous," he confessed. "Dangerous? How?" I felt a sense of foreboding. She's connected to some powerful people, and they want to use our family to gain influence, he explained, running a hand through his hair. If I don't comply, it could ruin everything we've built. My heart raced at the thought of Isabella's true motives. So, what do you plan to do? I need your help, he said, desperation in his eyes. We can't let her win. If we stand together, we can fight this. After a moment of silence, I nodded, realizing the gravity of the situation. Fine, but this doesn't change how I feel about our marriage, Victor. You need to prove to me that you can be trusted. He nodded, a flicker of hope sparking in his eyes. I'll do whatever it takes. I'll cut ties with Isabella. I'll fight for us. As we began to devise a plan to confront Isabella, I felt a new sense of purpose. We were no longer just husband and wife. We were partners in a battle against a common enemy. Days turned into a flurry of strategizing and preparing for the confrontation with Isabella. I worked alongside Victor, discovering new facets of his character. I saw his determination, the fire in his eyes that ignited hope within me. The night of the showdown finally arrived. Victor and I agreed to meet Isabella at a lavish restaurant where we could confront her in public. The atmosphere was tense, the air charged with anticipation. When Isabella arrived, she exuded confidence, dressed in a stunning red dress that accentuated her curves. She sauntered over, a smirk playing on her lips. Victor, darling, I was wondering when you'd show up. I clenched my fists at my sides, determined not to show any weakness. Isabella, we need to talk, Victor said, his voice firm as he faced her. Isabella raised an eyebrow, clearly amused. Oh? About what? Your little wife? She glanced at me with a smirk. Does she know you still have feelings for me? Enough of this, I interjected, my heart racing. We both know that you are using him to gain power and control. Your threats won't work anymore. Her smirk faded, and I could see the anger bubbling beneath her surface. You think you can just walk in here and threaten me? This isn't over, Sophia. I have connections you can't even begin to understand. Perhaps, Victor said, stepping closer to me. But I will no longer let you control my life or my marriage. This ends tonight. The tension in the air was electric as Isabella took a step back, her confidence wavering. You think you can just cut me off? You have no idea what I'm capable of. I'm done living in fear of you, he said, his voice strong and unwavering. We have the evidence to expose your schemes. If you dare to threaten us again, we will go public with everything. I felt a surge of strength at his words. This was the man I had hoped he could be, the man I had fallen in love with. As the weight of his promise settled in the air, I noticed Isabella's expression shift. Her bravado began to crack. You wouldn't dare, she spat, her voice laced with venom. Try me, Victor replied, his eyes steady and resolute. The air was thick with tension as we awaited Isabella's reaction. For a moment it felt like the entire world had stopped. Finally, her facade crumbled, and I saw the fear flicker in her eyes. Fine, she said, her voice cold. You may think you've won, but this isn't over. I will find a way to regain control. Victor held his ground, and I stepped forward. You're right. It's not over. But from now on, we're not afraid of you. We will fight back together. You may have had power over Victor before, but not anymore. Isabella narrowed her eyes at us, then turned on her heel and stalked away, her heels clicking sharply against the polished floor. The weight of her threats lingered in the air, but for the first time, I felt empowered. In the following weeks, the tension in our lives began to ease. Victor and I worked together, gathering evidence of Isabella's manipulative schemes. With each revelation, I felt our bond grow stronger. We shared late-night conversations filled with hopes and dreams, planning our future together rather than living in the shadows of our family's expectations. The more I learned about Victor, the more I admired his determination and resilience. I discovered that he had a passion for philanthropy and wanted to use his family's wealth to make a difference in the community. We began collaborating on charitable projects, finding joy in giving back, which drew us closer. Victor also took the necessary steps to formally end his ties with Isabella. It was a long and arduous process, but with every barrier he broke, I saw a new strength in him. He was no longer just my husband, he was my partner in every sense of the word. One evening, as we celebrated our newfound freedom and success at a charity gala, Victor took my hand, leading me away from the crowd. He brought me to a quiet terrace overlooking the city, where the lights twinkled like stars. "Sophia," he began, his voice soft but earnest. "I know our journey hasn't been easy. I've made mistakes and hurt you in ways I can't take back, but you've shown me what it means to love truly, and for that, I'm grateful." My heart swelled at his words, a mixture of hope and love flooding my veins. "Victor, I've learned so much about myself through this. I never thought I could stand up to someone like Isabella, but with you, I found my strength." He took a deep breath, his gaze searching mine. "I want to make this right. I want to build a future with you, one based on honesty, trust, and love. Will you be my partner in every sense?" Before I could respond, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. My breath caught in my throat as he opened it, revealing a beautiful diamond ring. "Will you marry me, Sophia?" he asked, his voice steady and sincere. Tears of joy filled my eyes as I took the ring in my hands, overwhelmed by the moment. "Yes, 1,000 times, yes!" I exclaimed, throwing my arms around him. Victor slipped the ring onto my finger, and we shared a kiss that felt like the beginning of a new chapter in our lives. It was a promise of love, resilience, and a future filled with hope.